Chapter 17 of The Eye of Osiris. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Eye of Osiris by R. Austin Freeman. Chapter 17. The Accusing Finger. Of my wanderings after I left the museum on that black and dismal Dies Irae, I have but a dim recollection. But I must have traveled a quite considerable distance, since it wanted an hour or two to the time for returning to the surgery, and I spent the interval walking swiftly through streets and squares, unmindful of the happenings around, intent only on my present misfortune, and driven by a natural impulse to seek relief in bodily exertion. For mental distress sets up, as it were, a sort of induced current of physical unrest, a beneficent arrangement by which a dangerous excess of emotional excitement may be transformed into motor energy, and so safely got rid of. The motor apparatus acts as a safety valve to the psychical, and if the engine races for a while with the onset of a bodily fatigue, the emotional pressure gauge returns to a normal reading. And so it was with me. At first I was conscious of nothing but a sense of utter bereavement, of the shipwreck of all my hopes. But by degrees, as I threaded my way among the moving crowds, I came to a better and more worthy frame of mind. After all, I had lost nothing that I had ever had. Ruth was still all that she had ever been to me, perhaps even more. And if that had been a rich endowment yesterday, why not today also? And how unfair it would be to her if I should mope and grieve over a disappointment that was no fault of hers, and for which there was no remedy. Thus I reasoned with myself, and to such purpose that, by the time I reached Fetter Lane, my dejection had come to quite manageable proportions, and I had formed the resolution to get back to the status quo ante bellum as soon as possible. About 8 o'clock, as I was sitting alone in the consulting room, gloomily persuading myself that I was now quite resigned to the inevitable, Adolphus brought me a registered packet, at the handwriting on which my heart gave such a bound that I had much ado to sign the receipt. As soon as Adolphus had retired, with undissembled contempt of the shaky signature, I tore open the packet, and as I drew out a letter, a tiny box dropped on the table. The letter was all too short, and I devoured it over and over again with the eagerness of a condemned man reading a reprieve. My dear Paul, forgive me for leaving you so abruptly this afternoon, and leaving you so unhappy, too. I am more sane and reasonable now, and so send you greeting, and beg you not to grieve for that which can never be. It is quite impossible, dear friend, and I entreat you, as you care for me, never to speak of it again, never again to make me feel that I can give you so little when you have given so much. And do not try to see me for a little while. I shall miss your visits, and so will my father, who is very fond of you, but it is better that we should not meet until we can take up our old relations, if that can ever be. I am sending you a little keepsake in case we should drift apart on the eddies of life. It is the ring that I told you about, the one that my uncle gave me. Perhaps you may be able to wear it as you have a small hand, but in any case keep it in remembrance of our friendship. The device on it is the Eye of Osiris, a mystic symbol for which I have a sentimentally superstitious affection, as also had my poor uncle, who actually bore it tattooed in scarlet on his breast. It signifies that the great judge of the dead looks down on men to see that justice is done and that truth prevails. So I commend you to the good Osiris. May his eye be upon you, ever watchful over your welfare in the absence of your affectionate friend, Ruth. It was a sweet letter, I thought, even if it carried little comfort. Quiet and reticent like its writer, but with an undertone of affection. I laid it down at length, and taking the ring from its box, examined it fondly. Though but a copy, it had all the quaintness and feeling of the antique original, and, above all, it was fragrant with the spirit of the giver. Dainty and delicate, wrought of silver and gold with an inlay of copper, I would not have exchanged it for the Koh-i-Noor, and when I slipped it on my finger, its tiny eye of blue enamel looked up at me so friendly and companionable that I felt the glamour of the old world superstition stealing over me, too. Not a single patient came in this evening, which was well for me, and also for the patient, as I was able forthwith to write in reply a long letter, but this I shall spare the long-suffering reader, excepting its concluding paragraph. And now, dearest, I have had my say. Once for all I have said it, and I will not open my mouth on the subject again. I am not actually opening it now, until the times do alter. And if the times do never alter, if it shall come to pass, in due course, that we two shall sit side by side, white-haired and crinkly-nosed, and lean our poor old chins upon our sticks, and mumble and gibber amicably over the things that might have been if the good Osiris had come up to the scratch, I will still be content, because your friendship, Ruth, is better than another woman's love. So you see, I have taken my gruel and come up to time smiling, if you will pardon the pugilistic metaphor, and I promise you loyally to do your bidding and never again to distress you. Your faithful and loving friend, Paul. This letter I addressed and stamped, and then, with a wry grimace which I palmed off on myself, but not on Adolphus, as a cheerful smile, I went out and dropped it into the post-box, after which I further deluded myself by murmuring nunc dimittis and assuring myself that the incident was now absolutely closed. But despite this comfortable assurance, I was, in the days that followed, an exceedingly miserable young man. It is all very well to write down troubles of this kind as trivial and sentimental. They are nothing of the kind. When a man of essentially serious nature has found the one woman of all the world who fulfills his highest ideals of womanhood, who is, in fact, a woman in 10,000, to whom he has given all that he has to give of love and worship, the sudden wreck of all his hopes is no small calamity. And so I found it. Resign myself as I would to the bitter reality, the ghost of the might have been haunted me night and day, so that I spent my leisure wandering abstractedly about the streets, always trying to banish thought and never for an instant succeeding. A great unrest was upon me, and when I received a letter from Dick Barnard announcing his arrival at Madeira, homeward bound, I breathed a sigh of relief. I had no plans for the future, but I longed to be rid of the now irksome routine of the practice, to be free to come and go when and how I pleased. One evening, as I sat consuming with little appetite my solitary supper, there fell on me a sudden sense of loneliness. The desire that I had hitherto felt to be alone with my own miserable reflections gave place to a yearning for human companionship. That, indeed, which I craved for most was forbidden, and I must abide by my lady's wishes. But there were my friends in the temple. It was more than a week since I had seen them. In fact, we had not met since the morning of that unhappiest day of my life. They would be wondering what had become of me. I rose from the table, and having filled my pouch from a tin of tobacco, set forth for King's Bench Walk. As I approached the entry of number 5A in the gathering darkness, I met Thorndyke himself emerging, encumbered with 2 deck chairs, a reading lantern, and a book. "Why, Berkeley!" he exclaimed. "Is it indeed thou? We have been wondering what had become of you." "It is a long time since I looked you up," I admitted. He scrutinized me attentively by the light of the entry lamp, and then remarked, "Fetter Lane doesn't seem to be agreeing with you very well, my son. You are looking quite thin and peaky." "Well, I've nearly done with it. Barnard will be back in about 10 days. His ship is putting in at Madeira to coal and take in some cargo, and then he is coming home. Where are you going with those chairs?" "I am going to sit at the end of the walk by the railings. It's cooler there than indoors. If you will wait a moment, I will go and fetch another chair for Jervis, though he won't be back for a little while." He ran up the stairs and presently returned with a 3rd chair, and we carried our impedimenta down to the quiet corner of the walk. "So your term of servitude is coming to an end," said he, when we had placed the chairs and hung the lantern on the railings. "Any other news?" "No. Have you any?" "I am afraid I have not. All my inquiries have yielded negative results. There is, of course, a considerable body of evidence, and it all seems to point one way. But I am unwilling to make a decisive move without something more definite. I am really waiting for confirmation, or otherwise, of my ideas on the subject, for some new item of evidence." "I didn't know there was any evidence." "Didn't you?" said Thorndyke. "But you know as much as I know. You have all the essential facts. But apparently you haven't collated them and extracted their meaning. If you had, you would have found them curiously significant." "I suppose I mustn't ask what their significance is?" "No, I think not. When I am conducting a case, I mention my surmises to nobody, not even to Jervis. Then I can say confidently that there has been no leakage.